Welcome to Deschutes Public Library's online programming. I'm Liz Goodrich, and I'd like to welcome you here today for a program about groovy books of the 1970s, which this program is a part of our series during the month of June that called No 70s, where we've been taking a look at what the 70s and the decade of disco, what it was like. So today, we've invited two of our outstanding community librarians to talk about some of our most favorite books of the 1970s. Paige Bentley Flannery is a community librarian at Deschutes Public Library. Readers Advisory is her main focus, combined with programming, outreach, and more. Classrooms, conferences, festivals, museums, and of course libraries have all been her beat. Her passion and creative style for art and poetry have been combined with instructing, coordinating, and providing information. She's been a librarian for almost 20 years. She's always reading and loves sharing and talking about books. Community librarian Roxanne Renteria has worked for Deschutes Public Library since 2014 and serves the La Pine Library area. As the child of two librarians, she grew up in her local public library, sneakily taking candy from the reference desk drawer and ensuring VHS tapes were rewound for the next customer. She began volunteering in her teens and has worked a variety of jobs in academic and public libraries across a handful of states. She wears many hats as a rural librarian, but her favorite duties are storytime, outreach, and program planning. Paige and Roxanne, welcome. Just want to compliment you on your fashion statements today, and I'm looking forward to hearing about those books.
Thank you so much. We're excited to be here. We're excited to be here to share some of our favorite 1970s books and trivia. But before we get started, grab a pencil and paper and start writing down as many books that you remember reading in the 70s, or that you remember reading after the 70s that were published in the 70s. Roxanne, you have a pencil and paper?
I'm ready. And our first trivia question is this, so get ready. There are over 500 species of this cold-blooded apex predator. The mechanical versions used in the first two films of this franchise were named after Steven Spielberg's entertainment lawyer, Bruce. What book were these movies based on?
Did you guess? If you guessed Jaws by Peter Benchley, then you are correct. What would happen if a 4,500-pound great white shark landed in a resort community and wouldn't go away? Sharks eat people, right? Do they target humans? Do sharks attack boats? No, they avoid humans whenever possible. Unless, of course, you look like a seal. But if you were going to write a book about the white shark, who would be in charge? A police chief? Would he be reading a detective novel called Deadly, I'm Yours? Well, in Jaws by Peter Benchley, there's 3 people are killed by a great white shark in 3 different incidents. And the police chief of a Long Island resort town is forced to take action. Now, in this latest copy, Peter Benchley wrote a foreword that if he were to write it over again, he probably wouldn't have the white shark be so deadly or killing so many people in such graphic ways. Now the author works as a marine conservation, works for marine conservation. But maybe this was your first grown-up book. The spring 1974 bestseller was on the bestseller list for many, many, many years. But there was one book that was always number 1.
The author of this next book is quoted as saying, "It's just a story about rabbits." Do you know what it is?
I brought my rabbit. This next one is Watership Down by Richard Adams. Now picture a whole field of rabbit holes. Have some lettuce. Where the grass is greener and the lettuce all grows in rows, rabbits everywhere. Well, this book is a little different. This book follows a band of rabbits who are in search of a new home, and they're led by Hazel and the brother, Fiber, where the rabbits survive this danger before arriving at their new home, titled Watership Down. Favorite parts in this include the rabbits' names, Acorn, Silver, Dandelion, and who wants to be torn into pieces? By a weasel? By a dog? Even cats. Did you remember some of those names, Roxanne?
I did, and don't you just love the names? Incredibly creative.
I appreciate the writing style of this book, and this is one that will always be on your shelf. When I was searching for my copy of Watership Down, we not only had one copy, we had two. So my guess is this might be still on your shelf. Again, this came out in the early 70s, and it was on the #1 bestseller list for quite a long time. And it's called Watership Down by Richard Adams.
This next novel features the preteen sensations. Was that enough of a hint? Do you know what I'm talking about, Paige?
I do. So I actually grew up in the 70s, and this was you received like a packet of books from Judy Blume, like a pack of 4. And this was the one book, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, by Judy Blume. Now, my copy did not look like this. Notice the texting on here. This is the more modern version of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. But this was the one book that I wasn't allowed to read in the 70s because it's based on Margaret. Margaret is 11 years old, and she was living in New York City, but they're moving to the suburbs. And when they move out to the suburbs, she's about to start school, and she has all these new friends. Nancy knows about just about everything. And the one thing that Margaret's not quite clear on is her religion. And so even though she starts talking to God, she's not quite sure if she believes in God. Well, when school starts, her teacher assigns this huge project for the year, and she decides to take on religion. And as she starts researching it, and being an 11-year-old girl, things start to happen. Oh, do you remember the name of the club that the girls were in with Nancy and the PTSs?
Yep. Sensations.
Preteen sensations. This book is filled of an honest approach of an 11-year-old who's learning new things about the first time you're wearing a bra, your first crush, moose, and many more. Judy Blume, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
Here's your next trivia question. This author has published 213 short stories, novellas, and novels during his prolific career, a third of which have been adapted for the big and small screens. Some of the most famous include The Shining, Cujo, and Pet Sematary. Who is it?
Got my pet rock. I actually have a pet rock. But let's go back to the 70s. It is Stephen King. Carrie by Stephen King was published in 1976. Now, if you're like me, you read this book first before you saw this movie. And the details and the descriptions that the author wrote about this book, this was actually one of the first books, it was actually banned. You can imagine why, right? The language, the details that were in it. But this is about Carrie. She's a 16-year-old girl. She's shy, she's sheltered, she's an outcast, and she's denied everything by her mother and abused by her classmates. But she has a power to move things. But then she gets a chance to fit in, a date to the prom, and everyone is there. Carrie is crowned queen of prom, but then everything happens so quickly. The laughter quickly turns to horror when the unthinkable begins. This was the high school movie to watch in the 70s, or 80s, excuse me. I watched it in the 80s, but it came out in the 70s. Another one by Stephen King. We have 2 now, Jaws and Carrie. Did you see the movie, Roxanne?
I did, and it horrified me as a child. I saw all of his books to movies as a child, and I'm still traumatized.
Yeah, the other one that came out in the 70s is Stephen King's The Shining. Maybe you have a favorite, Carrie or The Shining?
Equally traumatic. So our next female author published her first book in 1970 and has the distinction of being the first African-American woman to win a Nobel Prize. Who is she?
If you guessed Toni Morrison, then you guessed correctly. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This was her first book published in 1970. We're now celebrating the 50th anniversary of this book. Now, I grew up in the 80s and 70s and 80s, but read all her books in the 80s. But this was still my favorite, still published in 1970. How do we see images of beauty? This is the story of 11-year-old Pecola Breedlove, a Black girl in America whose love for its blonde, blue-eyed children can devastate all others, who prays for her eyes to turn blue so that she will be beautiful, and that so people will look at her, so that the whole world will look at her differently. Now, like Roxanne mentioned, this did win many awards, and if you follow today with Toni Morrison and all the books she's read and her beautiful quotes and her writing style. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. One of the other books that she wrote in the 70s is The Song of Solomon. This one came out in 1977, and it's a fitting reminder of her early creative masterpiece. Song of Solomon is a powerful book filled with poetic exploration of 4 generations of family. So 2 of hers came out in the 70s. Do you have a favorite of hers, Roxanne?
You know, no.
Yeah, I just love her writing style so much.
She's a beautiful writer, but I post-date her just a bit, so didn't grow up reading her in the same way that a child of the 70s would.
Yeah.
I delved into her a bit in college.
Nice.
I've not read The Bluest Eye, but I'm looking forward to it this summer. My to-be-read list.
Nice. We should mention that all these books are available at the Deschutes Public Library on either Overdrive or Hoopla, and now that the library is open, you can come in and pick up books on hold and place holds on those books. All right, I'm ready for that next trivia question.
Ready? Okay. So this novelistic autobiography was rejected by a total of 121 publishing houses and inspired a generation to road trip across America. What could it be?
If you guessed The Zen and the Art of Cycle Maintenance by Robert M. Pirsig, then you are correct. Published in 1974, this is a narration of a summer motorcycle trip, father and son. Perfect timing with Father's Day. And did you know this actually took place at They Come Through Bend in this book?
I had no idea until you told me, but that's the raddest thing.
One of the things about this book is writing on the motorcycle is you're part of the experience of the book. Instead of looking out and seeing what's happening around you, you're part of what's happening. And filled with science, religion, and tons of discussions about the world around you. This is a book not to be missed. And a perfect timing for Father's Day. Check out the Smithsonian article with Cycle Zen, Art of the Motorcycle, and check out the motorcycle, the Honda CB77 Superhawk from 1966, which was one of the motorcycles in this book. Many people have built up their motorcycles again and fixed them up and taken this journey that Robert M. Pirsig wrote about. Pretty amazing. Do we have another trivia?
Children of the 70s might remember that the Sony Walkman debuted on July 1st, 1979. We're fast approaching that anniversary. And then I have a bit of trivia related to The Price is Right. I don't know, Paige, as a child from the 70s, might you be able to guess what certain items cost during the 1970s?
You know, if you gave me a toaster right now, I might guess that the toaster was $5. I don't know. I did watch The Price is Right all the time in the 70s.
During the 1970s?
Yeah, and Family Feud.
So in researching for this program, I was a bit surprised to find out that The Price is Right game show actually started in 1956. It was revamped in 1972 with our iconic Bob Barker. And that popularity and viewing increased as his gray hair increased. Series. So if we use Consumer Price Index information for the year 1975, what do you think a pound of apples might cost if you were to visit your local grocery store?
In the 70s or now?
1975.
Okay, 1975. $3.50. $3.75, my final answer.
For a pound of apples in 1975, you're looking at spending about 34 cents.
Oh, right.
So is the price right for half a gallon of milk? What do you think you would have spent had you gone to your local grocery store? Or had the milkman visited you?
The milkman used to visit us, yes. Drop off milk on the door. A quarter.
About 78 cents.
Apparently I'm not eating apples or drinking any milk at this time. So looking forward to chocolate milk.
What was your, what family car did you drive around in during the 1970s?
Oh, gosh. Well,
did you have a car in Seattle?
I did not have a car till I moved here till Bend, but in the 70s, my dad drove a 280Z, orange, bright orange. Our whole house was orange. The house was orange. The inside was orange. And if you grew up in the 70s in Seattle, you probably owned this book, The Wheedle on the Needle, written by Stephen Crossgrove, with the Space Needle. Always wonder what that blinking light was at the top. The Wheedle on the Needle was the story to read in the 70s. Actually went through and found some more books that I still have that I read in the 70s. The Genie of Sutton Place, classic by George Selden. I still have my joke book. If you guys want to hear some 70s jokes, you let me know. This is The Biggest Riddle Book in the World by Joseph Rosenblum, and it's actually still published and around, updated, but you can check it out here at the library. My mother and I used to read all the time. So when this came out in 1979, Ramona and Her Mother by Beverly Cleary. This was one of our favorite books to read together. And my mom used to always write my name and how old I was. I was 8. Another classic was A Wind in the Door by Madeleine L'Engle. And I read the whole series, but this one came out in the 70s, not all of them. But I was actually surprised. We haven't talked about a lot of poetry or sports books. This is Big Hair and Plastic Grass, A Funny Ride Through Baseball in America in the Swinging 70s. This was not written in the 70s, but if you would like to know more about the 70s, check out this one. But some other classic authors that I was researching and I have a huge appreciation for, their work was Norman Mailer's The Executor's Song came out in 1976. Another one that we do no longer have at the library, but The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. And this is autobiography, mythology mixed together about immigrant female Chinese America. It was first published in 1976, and it's definitely become a classic during this time. A whole warrior of words. She's an amazing writer. I thought it was interesting about all the biographies that were written at this time, especially biographies about presidents. And of course, I can't find my book right now. It's called All the President's Men, the greatest reporting story of all time. The final days before President Nixon's resignation, one to look up. And then another favorite came out by Nancy Milford. Now, she was an author that I followed quite a bit through college, and had no idea written a biography titled Zelda. So Nancy Milford is best known for this book, Zelda, and it's about F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife and her life as a writer, a dancer, one of the first rappers around, right? It's since been translated into 17 languages. Talk about fashion style, right? I think I have one more biography to share. Roxanne, do you have any other fun trivia you wanted to share before I throw out my...
You know, you mentioned banana seat bikes and the fact that you had one as a child in the 70s. And I was super surprised to hear that the reason they waned in popularity was due to enthusiasts in the state of California who began to modify those bicycles for off-road use and trick performances. And so banana seat bikes waned and gave rise to BMX biking. But it's interesting, in recent years, we're starting to see a comeback.
That is interesting. Actually, I think, yeah, I've seen a lot of people biking around in banana seat bikes. Along those lines with biographies that came out, I always appreciate the biographies that come out now in 2020 about people in the past, but I also think it's interesting to look back at, especially the 70s, of how many biographies came out. This is Eleanor, The Years Alone. This is right after her husband had died, and just all the work that she did. And now there's so many books about Eleanor, but Joseph P. Lash was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and this biography was a National Book Award winning writer for, he also wrote Eleanor and Franklin. So interesting biographies around, definitely. Now, I don't know, hopefully our first book that we discussed with Jaws by Peter Benchley, this will be one you might pick up, or you might pick up Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. Hopefully we introduced a few new 1970s books, but my guess is you're familiar with most of these.
Well, Paige and Roxanne, it was so fun taking this little stroll down literary memory lane, and also some of the trivia. You know, I remembered the Judy Blume books, hiding them under my pillow because my mom didn't want me to read them. I remember going to the theater to see Jaws and being just terrified. And Stephen King, the first Stephen King book I read was Salem's Lot about vampires and have had just terrified of vampire stories ever since. You know, truly an interesting time in literature and the production of really seminal literary works that have, you know, stood the test of time, you know, from Toni Morrison to Maxine Kingston. So glad you mentioned her.
Yeah.
And really just such an amazing decade for books. So I want to thank you both. And as you mentioned, most of these books are available through the Deschutes Public Library. And now that we're opening back up, you can put holds on these books through our website and come on in and pick them up. So thanks, you guys.
Thanks so much. See you at the library.
Bye.